Hi, TheCinemaRanger here, and I've stepped off the trail on my favorite biking path to talk a little bit about Stranger Things, because one of the interesting things about this forest preserve is, even though we're sort of in the middle of nowhere, right in the heart of the forest preserve is this laboratory, and I don't really know what goes on there, but it's definitely got this Stranger Things kind of vibe. Speaking of Stranger Things, one of the very fun ways to sort of analyze that film is to take a look at the sexual and gender symbolism that's going on in that show, because, I think we can kind of enjoy it as like this fun TV event, but there's a much deeper sort of mythology going on there, which is probably part of the reason that it appeals to people, at least subconsciously. Okay, so for starters, we have this sort of innocent world inhabited by four young, sort of pre-sexual boys. You have Mike, Will, Lucas, and Dustin, and they live in this sort of man cave playing Dungeons and Dragons, a very sort of conventional, archetypical boys club, no girls allowed kind of thing. And then their world is sort of literally turned upside down by the appearance of a girl in number 11. Now, there are four reasons that I think I can sort of make this conclusion that the upside down place is supposed to represent some kind of feminine presence or femininity introduced into the world of these boys. The first thing I'd point to is very obvious. This world awakens for them with the arrival of 11. So here you have four, pre-adolescent boys or nearly adolescent boys, and suddenly a girl enters their world and their hormones awaken. And there we go. So woman enters, shadowy place comes into being. The next thing I would point to is the fact that in mythology, and in some cases psychology too, the feminine characteristics of our sort of nature are represented by the dark place. Need look no further than the yin yang, where the masculine is the light half and the feminine is the dark half. And you've also got like Jungian psychology and other things that sort of play into this idea that masculine characteristics are represented by the light and feminine characteristics are represented by the dark. The third thing I would point to as evidence would be the design of the Demogorgon. We've got the main creature in the first season, and then all the little minions in the second season, but all of them have this sort of flowery-like head, or this pod-like head that erupts into these almost flower-shaped petals. And if you look at history, the symbolism of the flower as kind of as a representation of something vaginal goes way, way back. And so that's, pretty easy conclusion to make there once you see it. Finally, the fourth and final case I would make for the upside down representing sort of the mythic feminine is the fact that we find out in season 2 it can be accessed via a portal, a crack in the wall, which again has this very vaginal presence to it. Portals typically have that quality. They're oftentimes like birth canals, or they have some sort of motherly or nurturing, or in this case, treacherous representation. I think another way to sort of analyze the larger meaning of this feminine presence in this world is to go a little bit beyond the core group of boys and talk about some of the victims who sort of fall to the treachery of this place, or the evil, overwhelming nature of this place. We can start with Barb. She's sort of this famous character now in pop culture lore, but if you think about Barb, she's not classically or traditionally beautiful. I think it's interesting that we could analyze Barb as being a victim of this overwhelming feminine because she doesn't meet traditional feminine beauty standards, and so in that way she sort of succumbs to the overwhelming nature of this place. The second interesting victim of the shadow would be Bob. He is characterized by all these nurturing and maternal characteristics. It's like, Bob has a very strong feminine presence to it, and in a way the reason he falls victim is because he can't sort of be patriarchal enough against this overwhelming feminine force. Then you've got Will, the first victim of this place, who's sort of pulled into the shadowy place. And, Will is by far sort of the softest of the core group. He's the gentlest soul. He's sort of the most, I guess, again, nurturing and motherly. And I think in season 3 it kind of alludes to the idea that he's possibly gay. I kind of wish the show would just confirm this so we could talk about it, straightforward rather than speculating. But I think, again, we see a character who's struggling with that feminine aspect in his life. Throw in the other B victim, you've got Billy. And Billy's sort of an interesting case because, unlike the other two, Billy is sort of pure masculine, but his rage comes from being manipulated by the feminine. So, here we've got Billy, who's like roid rage guy, except he's tainted by his hormonal desire for older women, or his act of being sort of hypnotized by the appeal of women, has kind of led to the situation where he's consumed with rage. I mean, he's the classic, angry boyfriend now, and sort of going off bat and blaming women for his rage. So there's some interesting syntax there. Finally, I think we definitely have to talk about Hopper. Now, we don't 100% know his fate, whether he's dead or alive. I'm guessing he's probably alive, but we don't know for sure. But to me, Hopper's very interesting because he represents sort of a strong patriarchal or paternal presence in the story. And the fact that, he's the stabilizing force that brings sort of sanity and conviction and clarity and sort of rights the wrongs in the world, I think is pretty interesting stuff. That, you know, we need this strong patriarchal figure to combat against this feminine presence. But we see at the end of season 3 that even he succumbs to this and is ultimately unable to sort of triumph against this force, maybe because he started to find love, and so in that sense he's kind of lost his stability as a strict sort of isolated patriarchal entity. Although one quick note about 11, and I think it's very worth pointing out about her, I actually think she represents a balance between masculine and feminine forces. I mean, she has a lot of masculine characteristics with her short hair and the fact that she wears pants and these other sorts of things that are sort of traditionally male. But I also think her name sort of indicates this idea of balance. After all, 11 is 2-1, so it's almost implying that 11 is like equal parts of the same thing, or equal parts of different things. So I think she represents the masculine and feminine. That's probably why she sort of falls between these two worlds of the light and the shadow simultaneously. She can bounce back and forth between them with great ease, because she is that balancing force. And that brings me to my final point about the show, which is a little less about gender and sexual identity, and that's the way that it represents familial structure. I think in it we see a sort of disturbing take on the fact that single mothers are in some ways sort of less capable of holding the family together. The best point I can make about that is we see the kids with two parents tend to be relatively stable from an emotional standpoint, but the kids with a single mother in particular are not emotionally stable. Of course, you've got Billy, who's incredibly angry, but you've also got Will and his brother and their mother Joyce, and both of those kids are more emotionally fragile than the other kids. So in this sense, we see a show that kind of epitomizes the single mother as in some senses less capable when the world is turned upside down. This point is really driven home at the end of the 3rd season when Hopper is gone, and it falls upon Joyce to be the force that's going to maintain this extended family which has been created through the show. And of course what we find out is she can't. She packs up and moves. Understandable, the motivation is clear, but you get the feeling that if it was Hopper who was left behind, he would have kept this extended family of characters together and held them in this town and sort of kept them fighting. I mean, who can say for sure, but certainly the show we have tends to reflect upon the ideal that women are sort of dark and scary, and their intrusion upon the masculine world is a frightening transformative process that brings darkness and shadowy things and desire and sexual impulses and in some cases violence and destruction to our world, and then cannot be maintained, cannot be sort of kept stable. It's a disruptive force in the nuclear family unit. I still like the show for what it's worth, but I do think it's interesting to kind of look at these mythological representations that manifest themselves and to be able to talk about them. I'm the Cinema Ranger, and I hope our paths cross someday.